Hello, everyone, and we are back with another post-race power ranking / race review. Gonna go over the stuff that's happened in the race. Got a little bit of extra stuff thrown in at the end that we can go over since I actually did a pre-weekend prediction that I published right at the start of FP1. People can go ahead and watch that, but if they want, but I'll talk all about it here, so we don't really have to do that anyways. But yeah. For those who don't already know, I do live stream watch-alongs on Twitch. Of course, I can't really show any of the copyrighted information, but I do have a couple little data screens. But I was building some Lego during it for people to just chill out. I actually built the McLaren MP4 during this last race. Well, I actually started it during qualifying the night before and then finished it during the race, but we did watch-alongs for both. But yeah, I'd appreciate if people came and hung out, toured along, and yeah, let's get into it. So we are going to start with, obviously, the drivers who I will not be ranking in this race, simply because, through no fault of their own, they didn't finish this race. So, Sargent got yanked out of his car after Albon crashed. Verstappen had his brake issue. Hamilton had what was going on with the engine that they needed to retire him. But I figure it's not really fair to fully evaluate them because they couldn't finish out the race. So these guys are exempt for this week. So we're going to start, as always, with the bottom, with the worst performers of the weekend, in my opinion. And then we will be moving up the whole, we'll be going up the order. So starting with what I think who was the worst performer of the weekend was Daniel Ricciardo. So he easily got outperformed by his teammate, and while I don't think he had the worst drive ever, the analytics and numbers do not lie. Based off of this performance, he gets himself into that red category of needing to move on. If he has another weekend like this, like what he just did, he's done. There's no defending it at this point. He could be another Nick DeVries situation if he continues to have weekends like this. I don't think Jeddah was this bad. I think Bahrain was actually good for him. Australia was awful. Plain and simple, Australia was awful. Ugh, he needs to turn it around. In the next category of drivers that I think need to improve their performance if they wish to kind of not get completely busted out, I put Albon, Russell, Bottas, Gasly, Ocon, and Zhou. So I don't think any of these drivers really had themselves a good weekend. Russell wasn't in a super bad place, but then he took himself out of the race. I know Alonso got a penalty. I completely disagree with it. The more times I've watched that video over and over and over again, did Alonso slow down through a corner? Yes. Should it have affected Russell at all? No. Literally zero effect other than it might have caught him off guard and been like, whoa. But, like, even if he did brake and slow the corner early, that should have had almost no impact on Russell, like, whatsoever. I completely disagree with the penalty. 20 seconds is way too harsh. Granted, we did still take that into account with Alonso later, but I am, counting Russell's DNF as his own fault. Albon, he crashed himself out in practices, had a chance to redeem himself in Logan's car. He did not do it. Had a decent qualifying, but that just didn't perform in the race. Bottas, he kind of got screwed by the team a little bit. I don't think he was having a bad drive in particularly. It just wasn't fantastic at all. And I think he needs to be doing at least a little bit more if he wants to get himself up in the category of a driver who will absolutely have a seat for next season. That goes for both him and Zhou. I think Zhou was just that little bit worse. I was expecting a bit of a bounce back performance from him after Jeddah last week. Absolutely did not happen. Ocon, I don't know why I was sensing that this wasn't going to be a good weekend for him, and it wasn't. While he did out-qualify Pierre, just in the race it did not happen. I think he actually had a brake issue at one point, but even still, he was down with the two Sauber cars who had absolutely awful pit stop issues. Ocon shouldn't be with that group. If other teams are having issues, like Sauber is having issues, you should be well and clear ahead of them, even with their own cars issues that they are having. In the next group, drivers who I think absolutely did a solid midfield-worthy drive this week. They're because I don't have too many who I ranked really great this week. So midfield drivers this week, Hulkenberg and Magnussen and Alonso. I think these drivers are these are the drivers who did as expected. They absolutely just did as they were expected to. Nothing above, nothing less. It's not really a bad performance whatsoever, but they were just kind of there. Granted, Alonso, he might have scored a little bit better if he had finished, if he hadn't lost positions after that penalty. But even still, like, this was not a good weekend for Alonso. Normally, I'm wanting to categorize Alonso in the next category we put him in. So for him to have a bad week and be still kind of in the midfield is pretty good for him. And then in the drivers who had themselves a great drive, I put basically everyone except Ferrari. So Lando Norris, Yuki Tsunoda, Oscar Piastri, Lance Stroll, Sergio Perez. Now, let's start with the top and move down. Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. We're going to categorize them together. I think they probably could arguably be about on the same level as, like, the next level below where they were doing as expected. But they were doing better than expected. They weren't being absolutely exceptional, in my opinion. Like, I think with the situation that Verstappen had, it's kind of fair that Norris was able to compete for a podium. I think it's great and fantastic. That's why he's rated so much higher than even the next driver below him, that he managed to get it. But still, he had himself a fantastic weekend. Yuki extremely outperformed everything this weekend. I've been probably one of his biggest trash talkers this season, but he had a fantastic race. Did amazing in qualifying, backed it up in the race for once. So if he does this kind of weekend on a regular basis, and Sergio has this kind of weekend again, or like continues to have these kinds of weekends, Yuki could get consideration for that Red Bull seat. I still think as of right now, the chances of that happening, extremely low. I think if it's on par like this, even still, I think Sergio keeps that seat. But the conversations will happen. The conversations would absolutely happen for Yuki taking that seat from Perez, if it's not going to someone else completely not in the field. And Lance Stroll, he absolutely had, in my opinion, the perfect weekend after Jeddah. Like, I know he's not ranked near the top, but to be near the top, you have to have a near... Like, he would have to be having to be competing for a podium with this Aston Martin team, which is not going to happen. I think he absolutely got everything out of that car that he could. I don't think it was meeting expectations. I think he did smash the expectations. He outperformed Fernando Alonso this weekend, in my opinion. Like, I'm trying to think if he was ahead of Alonso before the penalty or not. I think he was. I actually think Lance Stroll was, but the cameras weren't on him at all this race, which I think for him is absolutely a good thing. And then Sergio Perez, this was a disappointing weekend for him. To me, this was, I think, actually the exact same score I gave to him in Bahrain. But in Bahrain, that's simply because he just got outperformed so badly by Max. This time, it's just because he got outperformed by other drivers. Like, the McLarens were clear of him. The Ferraris were clear of him. In the events that Max isn't finishing a race, this is when Perez is needing to step up and perform, and he did not do that at all. Still a great driver, absolutely, but just he's not meeting the expectations levels of what it is to be with a top team. So for that, you get judged harder. The math is harder to justify. And then finally, my top two drivers of the weekend have to be both of the Ferrari drivers. Obviously, Carlos Sainz, number one, almost a perfect weekend for him. It's really hard to judge a little bit because, of course, there was no Verstappen to put him against. But I think that could have been a competitive race between the two of them. And he definitely outhandled Leclerc. But even still, Leclerc, I think especially after qualifying, he was in P5, to end up with a comfortable, in my opinion, a very, very comfortable P2. Like, I don't think he was going to bring the challenge to Carlos, but at the same time, I don't think Norris was going to catch him, as much as Lando might have been saying that. I don't think it was going to happen. I think these two were very, very, very comfortable. If they were in a championship battle, this would be an absolutely perfect weekend for the both of them. So those are my rankings for Australia. I still have my awards to do, and then I'm going to also compare with my pre-weekend predictions. So my driver of the day, worst driver of the day, best recovery. There wasn't really much to recover this weekend. And then drivers who just simply over-delivered and under-delivered. Under-delivered. Words. Driver of the day, gotta be Carlos Sainz again. Absolutely fantastic. He smashed it. Had himself pretty much the perfect weekend. Or as much as you could, with Max still ending up on pole. But yeah, it's hard to judge. Worst driver of the day, in my opinion, Daniel Ricciardo. I know he finished ahead of some other drivers in the field, but he absolutely should be finishing ahead of those, and he just got outperformed by Yuki so badly in a weekend where Yuki showed that this car should be competing for that low end of points, and Daniel wasn't even close this weekend. So worst driver of the day, Daniel Ricciardo. Best recovery, Lance Stroll. There wasn't really anything in the race, but simply for the fact of how good he recovered from last time out in Jeddah, he wins that award for me. Driver who over-delivered, Yuki Tsunoda. He outperformed expectations completely. Yes, maybe that car should have been competing for points, but he managed to get 6 points, I think, after Fernando's penalty. And that is amazing for that team. They really, really need it. Driver that under-delivered, Lewis Hamilton. Now, I know I didn't put him in my ratings, but even before, he was just completely under-delivering on this weekend. Qualified P11 during the race. He was sitting in P11, wasn't really showing much progress. Granted, I think at that time, Gasly hadn't done his pit stop or Hülkenberg yet. I think Hülkenberg might have still been behind him. I don't really remember. But at the same time, he just was not showing progress at all in this race. He's just continuing to have himself a very bad year, and I think Ferrari is really starting to regret their decision. And then finally, I had my pre-weekend quali predictions. I took Sargent out of this simply because he didn't actually finish it. So I'll show my differences between my pre-weekend prediction and where they actually finished. So Verstappen, Perez, I got them bang on. Carlos and Leclerc basically switched those two around. Almost same applies for Norris and Piastri. I thought they would be, I thought they would be P6 and P7. They got P4 and P6. So not too far off. My biggest shock there was Yuki and Fernando, I would say. Yuki definitely smashed expectations in qualifying, and Fernando was just extremely disappointing. But outside of that, there wasn't anything that was way too off. Maybe Nico Hülkenberg, I would have expected a little bit better out of him, but he made up for it in the race. And then when it came time for my actual pre-race predictions, taking out the 3 non-fault DNFs, so taking out Logan, taking out Max, taking out Hamilton. So, this is what my order would have been without those drivers. I would have done a Leclerc, Sainz, Perez podium. So I still had the Ferraris finishing 1-2. In my opinion, I still had them beating Perez. But I thought Perez would get ahead of the McLarens. That did not happen. I did pick Piastri to finish P4. I didn't count on Russell crashing himself out. I did think he would beat Alonso in the end. I'm really happy that I did guess both of the Haas drivers to finish P9 and P10, essentially. I knew where they would finish in that race, and I got that one absolutely nailed to a T. I got Piastri, Magnussen, Hülkenberg. Absolutely nailed. I got the orders of the Ferraris basically switched around yet again. Yeah, Perez was disappointing. Norris was fantastic. Tsunoda was amazing. Biggest disappointments could have been George Russell. He took himself out. But I don't want to give him full leniency, but I do think that crash was his fault. I don't blame Fernando for that whatsoever. But this entire right side of the grid over here, I was only off by 1 or 2 for all of them. Meanwhile, on the left side, I was off by like a couple places for most of them. But I think I overall did a pretty good job with the predictions, and I even gave myself a little bit of a score. Obviously, I didn't do predictions for Bahrain or Jeddah, so I'm not giving myself a score. This is out of 100, by the way. So 46.5, it's not fantastic at all. But you know what? When I actually calculated it out, I think I did all right. Obviously, I hope to do better, and we'll keep track of it throughout the season. But, yeah. And obviously, ignore on the other side of the field the tons of Australian flags and the secondary Jeddah flag. I will get that updated and corrected. It was just when I was working on this earlier today, there just simply wasn't a lot of time, and at that time I had kind of droned myself into a lot of other things. So I needed a break, and I gave up on that because it's basically irrelevant at this point, but it will get updated at a later time. Anyways, let me know what you think. That does wrap things up. Let me know what you think. Who would you put higher? Who would you put lower? And yeah, I think I forgot to include my data. I think I did that for my very first race weekend, but maybe I'll get back into that at some other point. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please give it a like and give it a follow if you don't already, and I hope to see you around, whether that's here or over on Twitch or any of my other social medias that are kind of going right down here right now. Thank you very much. I hope you have a great week, everyone, and we'll see you all at Japan or before that, or who knows what I'll do. I don't even know. Have fun.